In the summer heat of 1932, on the wind-swept Cheyenne River Reservation in South Dakota, an old man sits beneath a cottonwood shade with a white scholar named Stanley Vestal. Joseph White Bull is 83 winters old. His face is a map of old wounds, a powder burn across one cheek from the Fetterman fight, a scar on the forearm from a crow lance, another on the scalp where an Arapaho bullet once grazed him. His eyes, though clouded by age, still carry the quiet authority of a man who once rode beside his uncle's Sitting Bull and who, on a June afternoon in 1876, stood at the heart of the greatest defeat the United States Army ever suffered on the Western Plains. Vestal's pencil scratches across the pages, while White Bull speaks in Lakota, slow and deliberate, recounting a life measured not in years, but in battles, treaties broken, and a single day when the Greasy Grass ran red. For more than half a century, the nation has known that day only as Custer's last stand, carved in marble and bronze, a monument to doomed cavalry courage. Yet, here from the lips of a Minneconjou warrior who walked away from the smoke, the story widens into something older and larger. A fight for sovereignty on land promised forever by ink and oath, then taken by gold and bayonet. Americans have long cherished a clean, tragic image. George Armstrong Custer, golden hair flying saber, raised surrounded by overwhelming thousands on a Montana hilltop, dying with his boots on in one final glorious charge. Army reports survivors' tales from Major Marcus Reno and Captain Frederick Benteen and the swift court of inquiry in 1879 fixed that picture early. Lakota and Northern Cheyenne voices were almost nowhere heard in the first histories. Their testimonies were dismissed as savage boasting or simply ignored. On the Northern Plains, however, the same battle has always carried a different name, the Greasy Grass. It was never a last stand to them. It was a defense of the greatest encampment their nations had ever gathered. As a momentary triumph bought at the price of everything that followed. Joseph White Bull was born in April 1849 on the northern edge of the Black Hill in the heart of country guaranteed to the Lakota by treaty. His father, Makes Room, was a respected Minneconjou chief. His mother, Good Feather, was the full sister of Sitting Bull. From infancy, White Bull grew up in the shadow of leadership and in the certainty that the Paha Sapa, the Black Hills, belonged to his people forever. As a boy, he learned to ride before he could walk well, to read the land for buffalo sign, and to listen when elders spoke of the old days, before the Vejo, the spider web of white roads and forts, began spinning across the Powder River country. By his 17th winter, he was already counting coup. Lakota oral tradition and his own later pictographic records preserve the memory of a teenager unhorsing Crow Scouts driving off enemy horse herds under gunfire, earning the eagle feathers that marked him as one destined for the warrior societies. When Red Cloud closed the Bozeman Trail in 1866, White Bull rode among the decoys who lured Captain William J. Fetterman and 80 men beyond the Lodgepole Ridge, outside Fort Phil Kearny. In the chaos of that December ambush, he rescued a wounded cousin under heavy fire and killed at least one soldier with his own hands. The winter count of the Minneconjou still records the event as 81 killed fight. The following summer at the Wagon Box fight, he watched from a distant rise as a handful of soldiers with new breech-loading rifles held a circle of log boxes against hundreds of Lakota and Cheyenne. The old way of charging massed warriors into lance range was dying. Industrial fire had arrived. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 seemed to promise peace. It recognized Lakota dominion over the Black Hills and created the Great Sioux Reservation west of the Missouri River, while the Powder River country remained unceded hunting ground. Red Cloud burned the Bozeman forts and believed he had won. White Bull, barely 20, believed it too. Then came the gold rush of 1874. Prospectors flooded the hills in direct violation of the treaty. The Army sent to remove them instead protected the miners. By the winter of 1875 to 76, the Grant administration issued its ultimatum. All Lakota and Cheyenne still hunting in the unceded territory must report to the agencies by the 31st of January 1876 or be declared hostile. Many bands, including Sitting Bull's Hunkpapa and the Minneconjou under Makes Room, and his son White Bull, refused to abandon the last free buffalo range in the dead of winter. In the spring of 1876, the greatest gathering in Lakota memory formed along the Rosebud, and then the Little Bighorn, Hunkpapa Minneconjou, Oglala Sans Arc, Brule Blackfeet, Lakota Northern Cheyenne, and a few Arapaho, perhaps 7,000 people with twice that many horses. Sitting Bull's Sundance vision of soldiers falling upside down into camp became a rallying cry, not because it was magic, but because it confirmed what every warrior already felt: the army was coming. And this time, the nations would stand together. On the morning of the 25th of June, 1876, White Bull was watching the horse herd south of the great village when distant firing echoed down the valley. Scouts galloped in, shouting that gray horse troopers had shot a Lakota boy gathering horses. The quiet broke like thin ice. Major Marcus Reno's battalion struck the southern end of the encampment, first scattering women and children into the timber along the river. White Bull and hundreds of others raced toward the sound of the guns. Warriors fought in fluid knots, using coulees and sagebrush ridges closing to point-blank range, while Reno's men tried to form skirmish lines that crumbled under swarming attack. Within minutes, Reno was retreating across the river, his command shattered. From the Lakota side, the battle seemed already won. Yet dust clouds to the north told a different story. White Bull turned with Crazy Horse Gall and scores of others toward the new threat. Custer had divided his regiment and was driving toward the river fords, perhaps hoping to strike the non-combatants and seize hostages. Lakota and Cheyenne fighters converged from three directions. At a deep bend still called Medicine Tail Coulee, White Bull later described grappling with a soldier in buckskin who rode a sorrel horse. The man fired a pistol point blank. White Bull knocked him from the saddle with a stone club and struck him again on the ground. Whether that soldier was George Custer himself remains one of the battle's enduring controversies. White Bull never claimed it was Custer. Stanley Vestal later suggested the possibility, and some historians have followed. Other Lakota and Cheyenne accounts place Custer's death farther up the ridge, shot from a distance, by several warriors at once. Modern forensic work on the battlefield finds no conclusive evidence. What is certain is that the charge collapsed at the river. Momentum lost, the five companies were driven uphill into encirclement. On the ridges now called Custer Hill and Last Stand Hill, the end came quickly. Soldiers shot their own horses for breastworks. Panic spread as warriors poured fire from every quarter. White Bull moved through the smoke, firing a captured Springfield rifle, counting coup with lance and club-seizing guidons and carbines. Lakota testimony repeatedly stresses the speed of the collapse once the soldiers realized how many warriors opposed them. Custer had expected perhaps 800 fighting men, not 2,000 or more. Within an hour, the firing died away. 268 United States soldiers and scouts lay dead across 4 miles of ridges and coulees. Lakota and Cheyenne losses were fewer than 40 killed. White Bull walked away from the field carrying wounds, captured weapons, and the knowledge that the camp was safe for now. He did not know that the victory would mark the beginning of the end of freedom. The Army's response was swift and merciless. Reinforcements flooded the plains. The Great Sioux Reservation was confiscated by congressional act. The buffalo herds were deliberately exterminated to force submission. White Bull rode north with Sitting Bull into Canada, enduring years of hunger and cold. In 1881, starving and homesick, he surrendered at Fort Buford. He took the name Joseph, accepted reservation life, and in time succeeded his father as chief of the Minneconjou on the Cheyenne River. He served as a judge in the Court of Indian Offenses, walking the narrow line between imposed law and Lakota tradition, always wearing beneath his Euro-American coat the beaded vest and eagle feather of a warrior. In the 1920s and 1930s, scholars finally sought him out. With Stanley Vestal in 1932, and later with James H. Howard, White Bull drew pictographs of his battles, recounted tactics and ceremonies, and spoke of the Greasy Grass without hatred or exaggeration. Vestal popularized the idea that White Bull had killed Custer. Responsible scholarship today treats that claim with caution, one thread among many. What remains undeniable is the clarity of his memory, the smell of gunpowder and sage, the cries of wounded horses, the moment when a people defended the last fragment of their world. Joseph White Bull died in 1947, 71 years after the battle. Having lived long enough to see the first Indian markers placed on the Little Bighorn field beside the old marble stones of the Seventh Cavalry. The battlefield is no longer only a monument to defeat. It is a place where Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho fallen are named as well. White Bull's voice, preserved in ink and memory, forced its way into the center of a story once told only one way. To walk away from Custer's last stand was never merely to survive a single afternoon of gunfire. It was to carry an indigenous account across decades of erasure, and in the end, to place it beside the official tablets until both could be read together. On a quiet reservation evening in 1932, an old man finished speaking. The pencil stopped scratching, and the smoke over the greasy grass drifted at last into the living memory of two nations. The story is no longer only about a golden-haired lieutenant colonel dying on a hill. It is about a Minneconjou warrior who refused to let that hill define the whole truth, and who kept walking long after the guns fell silent.